Well, in honour of getting my first ratings on a video, whoop-de-doo, 2.5 by the way, 2.5 more than I reckoned I would get at all, but I digress. I thought I'd actually do a video on ratings, like a subject that's been done to death, especially on the podcasts that I listen to, but ratings, reviews, etc. in general. Now, obviously, in TV, subject I'm not really going to talk about too much. Obviously, ratings are fairly important because that they make a lot of their money from advertising, and if you're doing well in the ratings, then in the next season, not obviously in the season that you're in at the moment, if that's how it works, I believe it does. That's like that will determine how much you earn per 30-second advertisement slot. So ratings are obviously important in TV, but who cares about that? Movie-wise, it's a bit more acceptable to receive. It's usually like 5-star system. It's usually fairly acceptable to score 3 stars. Like that's still a good movie. It might not be the best movie, but it's still probably worth going to see. But in games, which is where 90% I would say of the reviews I read, because I do still read the movie reviews and like TV shows when I bother to read that section. I'd say easily 90% of the reviews I read are video game based, which is where most of this subject is going to come from. But uh, it's very very rare to actually have like the 2.5 star or 50% or whatever scale you want to use as the actual average. I mean, like I said, this is a subject that's been done to death. I mean, I've heard all the points of view from this, but I thought, what the hell, I'd do it anyway. Um, I mean, but the thing is, I don't see why people really care. Because at the end of the day, I've enjoyed the hell out of some very, well, not incredibly poorly, but not the best scoring games. Before I did this, I actually looked at Metacritic. That's by far the most research I ever intend to do before a video. I looked up these two games, like the two that first popped into my head, of two that, while I recognised they weren't brilliant games, I really enjoyed and I played for many an hour. These were Die Hard Vendetta on the GameCube and Leisure Suit Larry, Magna Cum Laude on the Xbox. And I think Leisure Suit Larry scored 54, Die Hard scored 60 on the Metacritic. And like I said, I was able to recognise myself that these weren't the best games. But then they didn't have the most money spent on them either. They weren't. They're like the summer B movies and stuff like that you get in the cinema. But I bought them anyway, mainly because they were cheap when I found them. I was just like, well, I'll give that a shot for that kind of money. And as far as the Die Hard game went, I'm not at all into first-person shooters, something that I'll address later. But I do enjoy the Die Hard films. Again, as far as the films go, I would never say they were absolutely fun. They were like the best cinema like kind of thing you'd ever see. But they are very they're very enjoyable rather than necessarily good films. And at the end of that's what games and all these entertainment things. They're supposed to be whether you enjoy them or not, whether they're fantastic script writing, fantastic uh, acting, like all the elements blended together perfectly. It's supposed to be just whether you enjoy it or not, whether it was worth doing or not. That's all that matters to me at the end of the day. And like with Leisure Suit Larry again, like I recognise it's in some places a terrible game, and again I'm saying this despite the fact that both these games on Metacritic scored above 50%, which is above average. But again, even though I know this, like I've been sort of brainwashed and biased by it over the years because used to get more official video game magazines, and you sort of just get used to like 75% being a bad game, and then anything above 90 is one you have to get, and ooh, I don't know, it scored 85. Is it actually worth the cash? Especially when I was younger, when I could only afford to get new game once, twice a year, and the rest would be relied on swaps. So like the game flow was much smaller than what I get these days with my disposable income. Ironically, you don't have nearly as much time as I used to actually play the games, but I buy a lot more than I used to. But people seem to get offended, and it seems to have even spread to like people as well, like with the rating systems you get on. For like if it's still running, I don't know, but it's just what popped into my head at the moment. Like there used to be like hotornot.com or something like you put your photo up and people would rate you based on that, and things like Face Party, and this is really going back a number of years, but people would get really offended if you rated them a 9 instead of a 10 or an 8. God forbid you said you're an 8. That's like 3 better than average because it was a 10 based score system. In the past, I did Mensa tests, and like the preliminary test said I was in the top 2% of top 2% like for my intelligence. I mean, obviously that is not true. Blatantly, that is not true. But to be honest, I'd be very happy if I was told I was in the top 49%. If I was slightly better than average, I would be very happy with that in any aspect. As long as I don't care, I'm not right at the top. I couldn't care less about that. As long as I'm somewhere in the middle, I'm quite content with all that kind of stuff. So 2.5 stars on one of my videos, that's great. That's fantastic. But yeah, I don't know why. In all the discussions I've heard about this and I've tried to go over it, I still don't see why it seems to be more acceptable with movies. But especially now we have like Metacritic and that spread. I mean, last time I checked, it seemed to be just video games, but it has actually seemed to have spread to all forms of media. It's worrying when bonuses for developers and like their actual cash flow, their income actually depends on these Metacritic scores. I mean, they obviously tried their best because it is actually a weighted system. It's not just every stupid website on there and every single person who gives a score is given the same weight. It's purely down to the person running the site or people running the site's opinion, but they have more respect for some media outlets than others, so obviously they give more weight to those than to, well, for instance, I tried running a video game website a while ago. This is going back a few years, and it was absolutely awful. But I mean, I couldn't imagine them trying to, in any way, shape, or form, put what I just blurt out on the internet to up against Edge or Games TM or OneUp or GameSpot or anything else. I mean, there's obviously a disproportionate thing there, but I mean, it's really stupid at the end of the day. The end number, which a lot of this goes on, shouldn't matter at the end of the day. All that really matters is you find someone who has a similar opinion to you, like you read a few of the reviews before, or the actual content of the reviews. That's the main thing, rather than the number right at the bottom. If there is actually an oral letter for some outlets, thank you, OneUp. But it's the actual content. You find someone who seems to like similar games to you, or you hear you hear from your friends what kind of games they like, and if you have a similar taste, you trust their opinion more. You go with what they do rather than, but it only got a 7, etc. It's really, really stupid. But you can't stop stupidity. If we could power the world, if we could find somehow electrical power, like if we can, instead of like nuclear power stations or coal or whatever, if we could somehow harness the power of stupidity, and I'm guilty as everyone else, we would solve the energy crisis. We would easily, between the main countries, we would be able to power the world for at least 100 years on the current human stupidity going around today. Never mind the rest of the week or the rest of the year. But that's only one guy's opinion, so I'll leave it there.